Hi and welcome to Swedish Plant Guys. In this video we give you all you need to know about the Aglaonema, also known as the Chinese Evergreen. And as usual, we divide this video up into 4 parts. You have the purchase, the planting, the placement and the care of the plant. So if you want to skip forward you can. However, we always recommend you to watch the entire video to get all you need to know. Now, everything in this video is based on our over 20 years experience of taking care of indoor plants. So please like, comment and subscribe. That really helps our channel a lot. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. So let's get started. So starting off with the purchase. Now when you go out to buy an Aglaonema, you've probably heard that this is an easy to care for plant. And it is. It's quite easy. However, in this video we will be going through a couple of things you need to know to be able to make it grow and thrive. But there are a lot of different varieties. And when you get out to the shops, there can also be different names for this plant. Now the Latin name is Aglaonema hybrid or Aglaonema commutatum. And then you have a variation of this plant. And we have, I think, 7 different types of Aglaonemas here today. They can also be called a Chinese evergreen or also a Philippine evergreen, depending on where you live in the world. I've also seen the name poison dart plant for this plant as well. Here in Sweden we call it silverkalla. But it's not really a kalla, but it doesn't matter. It's a name for this plant. So I will call this Aglaonema since that is the Latin word and the most correct word for these plants. So when you get out to your shop, there can be a ton of different varieties of this plant. As I said, we have 7 different varieties here. I think here in Sweden you can get almost 20 more than this. So which one should you pick? Well, that is completely up to your preferences. What do you want in your house? However, this is a variegated plant, which means that it has different colorations on the leaves. And the coloration can be everything from green to white to creamy white to, as we have here, a little bit of red. They're all different types of colors. And the coloration here is the key because the more colors or variegations we have on the leaves, the more light this plant requires. So you need to know that when you go out and buy one. And we'll go through that even more closely on the care of the plant. But when we go out, we need to know that if you want to buy one that has a lot of white in it, like this one here, it needs more light than this one that has more dark colors and more green on them. Now, if you want to know more about variegation, what it is and how it works, we have a video you can go and watch to know more about it. But here we have 7 different varieties. And the first one here is called the Ivory Jade, which has these extremely nice looking leaves with a lot of white in them. Now all of these white parts of this variegated leaves here, they cannot photosynthesize. It's just the green parts that can photosynthesize. So this is a plant we know, okay, it needs a little bit more light than perhaps one that has darker colors. But this is the Ivory Jade. Then we have the Ivy Green, which is one of my personal favorites that looks like this. Now, as you can see here, this one also has a stem that is almost white. It's creamy white, but that makes the plant stand out even more since there is that contrast between the green and the white and yellow. Then we have this one here, which has a lot of red in it as well. This is not a personal favorite of mine because I think that on the leaves it actually looks a little bit like it has pests on it. it doesn't. It looks like this, but I know a lot of people love this plant. This is the Aglaonema Crete, and we'll put a list in the description below so you can see the names of all these plants. Moving on, we have the Silver Queen here, which has this really nice pattern on the leaves. And next to it, we have one just called Stripes. Now they are very, very similar, but the pattern is a little bit different. And then we have another favorite of mine, that is the Silver Bay. And it has even more of this grayish pattern on them than the Silver Queen and the Stripe does. So I think that's all of the different varieties we have. Now the Aglaonema is a fairly cheap plant, at least here in Sweden. I don't know of the rest of the world, but here in Sweden it's not an expensive plant. The reason for that is that it grows quite quickly in the greenhouse. But you need to know that when it comes to your house, when it's not going to get a perfect environment, it's actually going to be a plant that grows quite slowly. But it's a big advantage that it grows quickly in the greenhouse because it's fairly cheap. Now, when you buy a plant and you have, if you've put your eye on this Ivory Jade here, then take a look at the different plants you have on the table in your shop and make sure to pick the plant that has the most amount of starters. What I mean by that is the most amount of stems that has leaves on them that is coming out from the soil here. Usually they have planted the exact same amount of starters in the greenhouse, but some plants just grow a little bit faster and gets a little bit thicker and has more new stems coming out of the pot. Choose that plant, because then you have a plant that is more likely to become fuller and nicer than the one that doesn't have those starters. I recommend you, concerning Aglaonemas, to actually take a look at the roots. Now, usually when you have an Aglaonema, it's fairly simple to do that, because you can just grab a hold of the leaves and the stems like this. You can just push a little bit on the sides of this plastic pot here, and you can feel that it's actually starting to loosen from the pot. And then you can just try and pull a little bit, and there you go, you have the roots. It should look something like this. You have quite thick, a really nice root system, and the roots are white or creamy white. If the roots here are dark, then I would not buy that plant. I would choose another plant there, because then it could have root rot or something else. It should look something like this. So then just put it back into the pot. Next up, we take a look at the leaves. And what are we looking for? Well, actually on this one, we actually have a flower here. That's not common when you are buying a small plant like this. Usually they become quite larger before they shoot out a flower. But take a look at the leaves. We are looking for pests, and we are looking for something on the leaves that shouldn't be there. Now that can be brown tips, it can be black spots on the leaves, anything that just looks out of the normal, out of the ordinary. And pests. Now, take a look at the underside of the leaves and make sure that you can't see anything. You can't see anything moving or anything. Just if you have small spots underneath the leaves, something that is out of the ordinary, don't pick that plant. Look at another one and try to find one that doesn't have anything, okay? And if you see that a lot of plants actually have something that something that shouldn't be there, then maybe go somewhere else, because then it could be an infestation that is on all of them. But if the leaves look like this, you have nothing on them, they look perfect, then okay, roots are fine, leaves are fine. I even have a flower that's showing us that this is feeling great. This one is the one I pick, and then we go. But the aglaonemas actually don't like cold temperatures. They need to have a temperature that is somewhere in between 15 and 27 degrees Celsius or 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you know that you're buying this plant, let's say in wintertime, and you know that it's freezing cold outside, make sure that the shop wraps this in paper or plastic so you can take it home and it has its own little cocoon, and that cold cannot get to the leaves. Because if you get cold on these leaves, it will show you 2, 3 or 4 days later. It's because the cells has actually been damaged, they've burst. And you'll see it by having large dark spots on the leaves. And if you have that, well, you need to take away those leaves completely. They will never be fine again because those cells are dead. And then you have a plant that just maybe has 1 or 2 leaves left. So make sure, if you know it's cold, that they wrap it in something and you maybe take it home in a heated car, or if you have to walk or bicycle or something, put it in another bag or a backpack or something so it's protected. As you saw, it is a flowering plant. And the flower actually looks something like this. Now, it hasn't really opened up yet, but I think we have something here that is open, we'll see. On this massive Silver Bay here, and this is huge, we actually have a lot of flowers here. But no, they are not opening up yet. But the flower itself is not that pretty. It's actually, you have to look twice before you even see it. So we buy this plant because of the foliage and because of the all-around aesthetics of the leaves. But know that it does flower. It can flower twice a year, usually flowers once a year in spring or summertime when it's active. But we've seen varieties that can flower twice or even 3 times a year. So you've bought your Aglaonema and you get home with it. Now, planting. I know a lot of you want to repot your plants immediately. Now, we recommend you to always wait a bit. Let that plant settle in your house. Now, if you did what I told you to do, you have looked at the roots and seen that they look nice. There are a lot of them, but there could actually be a little bit more before I repot this. So I would just wait a couple of months before doing anything to this plant. And when you have repotted a plant, wait 2 to 3 years before repotting it again. That is usually a good time for the Aglaonema. It is a plant that actually likes it when it's a little bit root bound, so it's not something you want to push. A repot, you can just wait until you see that there are roots coming out of the drainage holes, or if you see that the pot is actually starting to bulge, then it's time to repot. And when we repot, we always, with an Aglaonema, use a pot that has drainage holes in the bottom. Because one of the worst things you can do with an Aglaonema is that it's standing in water. We need all of that excess water to go out of the pot. So always use drainage holes. And when we repot, we can actually repot in 1 or 2 sizes larger. This is a plant that actually likes it to be placed in a large container. And what will happen if it is in a very large pot or container is that it will start to be wider. It will grow outwards. It will send out new stems all the time and it will be huge, like the Silver Bay we have here next to us. However, if you don't have that place for a huge Aglaonema, our recommendation is that you start to prune it quite often. just start to cut off some stems on a regular basis. Once or twice a year, maybe 3 times a year. Doesn't matter when you do it, because then it will focus all of its energy on creating new buds and start to grow from that cut. And it will not grow like this and become extremely wide and large. But if you want it to become large, you put it in a large pot and you just leave it alone. You never prune it and it will grow like this. It will become huge. Now this is a plant that likes to be planted in a soil that has a lot of peat in it. A lot of organic materials and has a high amount of peat. Now usually that is what you have in a standard planting soil. So that usually works perfectly. However, we recommend you to take that standard planting soil and mix it up with, let's say, perlite or pumice. And you can mix that up in a 80% soil, 20% perlite or pumice, because then you get better drainage. Like I said before, it doesn't want to stand in water, and if the soil is too wet for a very long period of time, it can also be a problem. But by adding perlite or pumice, you're adding drainage to that soil, and it will just grow a little bit faster and the roots will love it. You can also plant your Aglaonema in what we call pure pumice, which is actually a mixture of pumice and clay. If you want to know more about pumice, we have a video you can go and watch, so you know everything on how to use pumice instead of soil. It also works perfectly in a self-watering pot or container. It thrives in one of those type of pots. What you need to know is that in wintertime, if you have it in a self-watering container in wintertime, you might want to make sure that the water reservoir in the bottom of that self-watering container actually dries out in between your waterings. Because otherwise it could get a little bit too moist in wintertime when it's a little bit dormant. Now, a lot of things here. Self-watering system, if you want to know more, we have a video on that. Also dormancy, if you don't know what that is, we have a video you can go and watch as well. Moving on to placement. So where should I put my Aglaonema in my house? Well, to know that, we usually need to go to where does this plant live in nature. And this is native to Eastern Asia, mostly Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia. And it grows on the floor of the rainforest. So it's actually covered by the trees. So this is a plant that doesn't need and doesn't want direct sunlight. So up here in the northern hemisphere, I would recommend you to place your Aglaonema. If it's going to be in a window, then you should place it in a eastern, western or northern facing window. Because if you put it in a southern facing window, it will get too much sunlight, which will burn the leaves of the plant. You could also place this a little bit into the room, because it is a plant that can handle darker placements. So you could actually put it 1, 2 or 3 meters into the room and it will also be fine. However, and this is very, very important, the more variegated and the more colors or lack of colors you have on your Aglaonema, the more light it needs. So this here, this Ivory Jade here, actually wants to be placed quite close to a window to get a lot of indirect sunlight. But we have this one here, which is called the Maria. I think we actually forgot this plant in the beginning. This is the toughest Aglaonema there is. This can handle really, really dark placements and grow and thrive. So these two are actually quite different in placement. This one needs to be placed close to a window, and this can be placed almost anywhere in your house. Another thing you need to know is that the more light you give your aglaonemas, the quicker they will grow. Now, they are not quick growers, at least not when you're not in a greenhouse, but they will grow quicker in a light spot and really, really slow if you put it in a dark spot. It's not a problem, but if you want it to become large and big and this really, really massive thing, it needs quite a lot of light to be able to be like this. Humidity is not usually a problem with the aglaonemas, which is really, really good, because here in Sweden we have really low humidity in wintertime indoors. So this is a plant that actually is perfect for a Swedish indoor environment. It likes humid spots, so it can actually work almost anywhere. But if that humidity goes below 30% or 25% humidity, then you could get problems. And you will see that on the leaves, because they will start to droop, and they can also get injured. They can get the tips of the leaves here actually start to get brown, and they get really, really dry brown. So that when you touch that tip, it just crumbles and falls apart. That could be an indication that you have too low humidity. Now, an easy way to remedy that is just to put a tray with some pebbles on it and some water on it next to the plant. That water will start to evaporate, and it will help the plant to get a little bit higher humidity just around that spot. Another thing is drafts, which can also be a problem up here in Sweden when we have cold winters. And drafts are usually not a problem if they are not really, really cold. So in wintertime, if you know that you have a window that you have open a lot, you should never put your aglaonemas there. However, it could be placed there in the summertime when that draft is warm and not cold, because that will actually help to raise the humidity around the plant. So if you have cold drafts, make sure that they are not harmed, but otherwise it's not a problem. And you can also place this plant on a windowsill directly above a radiator. Some plants actually react negatively to that placement, but usually you don't get a problem with that with aglaonemas. Moving on to the care of the plant. Now, this is a plant that in summertime wants to live in a quite moist environment. So it likes it when the soil around the roots is a little bit moist, but it never wants to stand in water. So what we do is that in summertime, we make sure that when we water this plant, we make sure that the excess water goes out of the pot, and then we wait until the top soil of the plant here, you can even feel a little bit down, so maybe 1 centimeter, half an inch down into the soil. When you feel that that is dry, you can water it again. But make sure the excess water goes out of the pot again. In wintertime, this plant goes a little bit dormant, which means that it doesn't drink as much water, and it doesn't like it to be too wet around the roots for a long period of time. So in wintertime, we actually make sure that it dries out in the soil a little bit further down. So then maybe we feel 1 inch or 1.5 inch, which is about 2.5 to 3-4 centimeters down into the pot. When that is completely dry, then we water it again. Because if it's too moist in wintertime when it's dormant, the roots could get harmed. If you've watered your aglaonema too much, it will show you. And what happens is usually that the tips of the leaves here or the edges of the leaves start to become brown. And it is a dark type of brown that is a little bit soft and almost a little bit wet. As I said before, if that tip is dry and crunchy, it could be humidity, it could be that you haven't watered your plant enough. But if that brown is darker and soft and doesn't crumble when you touch it, you've probably watered it too much. And if it gets too much water and it's standing in water, you could get root rot. That means that the roots will no longer be white and creamy like this. They will be darker and almost brown sometimes. They will have a bad smell as well. And you will see it on the leaves that you start to get those brown edges that were soft and mushy actually start to become spots inside of the leaves as well. Then you probably have root rot. If you have an overwatered plant like that, we have a video you can go and watch to make sure that you dry it out as fast as you can. But what happens if you are not watering your plant enough? Well, the first thing are the tips, as I said before. The tips of the leaves turn crunchy brown and just crumble and fall off. Another thing that happens, and this is really, really common, we can actually see here on this massive Silver Bay here, because I haven't watered this plant for almost 2 months now. It's standing in pomace, so it should be watered around once a month, but I've purposely not watered this to be able to show you what happens. Now, underneath all of this here, we actually have the oldest leaves, and the oldest leaves are turning yellow, bright yellow like this. As you can see, there's nothing on the newer leaves, nothing on top here. It's the oldest leaves down by the pomace here. And it's all around on every stem. I think every stem has at least one yellow leaf like this. This is an indication that you have not watered it enough. So if you see this, increase the frequency of how often you water, and it shouldn't be a problem. But it's not a big problem for this plant. It can dry out like this quite often. It will not die from it. What will happen is that you will lose some of the leaves in the bottom here. And you can just take these away by just pulling on them. If they're still attached quite hard, you can pull some leverage on the stem and just pull it a little bit harder, and the entire leaf comes off like this. Now, when I give this plant water again, it will be happy. It will probably start to unfold those flowers that are not open yet. So that is a very, very common thing if you've underwatered your Aglaonema. It could show yellow leaves if you've given too much water as well, but as I said, it's more likely that you get these spots on the leaves if you watered too much. Too little, leaves will become yellow, and it's the oldest leaves underneath. Now, an easy way of just keeping your Aglaonemas looking healthy and keeping them free from pests as well is just by using a wet cloth. We usually use a wet microfiber cloth used for cleaning, and just wiping off the leaves like this with that wet towel. You can also wipe underneath the leaves as well. This will make sure that the leaves have this really glossy and vibrant look to them. So once a month, wipe the leaves with a wet cloth or a microfiber cloth. This will help you to get rid of all those dust particles, and it will also look more healthy. Another thing, like I said, is that if you have pests on it, it's one way of making sure to get rid of those pests. But if you see that you have pests, then of course that cloth, you cannot use that on anything else. Throw it away after doing that, because otherwise you will have pests on all your plants. It's very unlikely that you get pests on these. It's very uncommon. But if you get pests, usually it's scale, mealybugs, or spider mites. At least here in Sweden, that's usually the big three that attacks this plant. If you get scale or mealybugs, I highly recommend you to go out and buy a pesticide. Follow the instructions and make sure that it is for scale or mealybugs. And just use that pesticide on the plant, because when you start to see that there is so much surface area in these big leaves here on these plants, that when you see that you have plants, usually they are everywhere. So it's quite hard to just start by removing them yourself. So I highly recommend a pesticide to remove that. But if you get spider mites, now spider mites you cannot see with the naked eye. So when you see that you have these small web-like things on your leaves, it actually looks like a spider was there. It's usually spider mites. When you see that, there are millions on your plant already. But spider mites on a plant like this, it's quite easy to get rid of, because what you do is that you take this into your, if you have a bathtub, you can place it in the bathtub, or you can take it outside if you have a garden, and then you take a hose and you rinse off the leaves. All of the leaves, just rinse them off. Make sure that you protect the soil so that it doesn't get too wet. But rinse it off and do that every day for 2 weeks. If you do that, then you will get rid of those spider mites. It's a very simple, easy, and environmentally friendly way of handling those spider mites. Now, the last thing you need to know about the Aglaonema is that it is mildly poisonous. It has something inside that is called calcium oxalate. And calcium oxalate is a form of salt that has extremely sharp crystals. And those crystals irritate and can give you problems. If you ingest a part of this plant, you could get swelling. You could also become sick from that calcium oxalate crystals. It also means that if you get some of the sap of this plant on your skin, it could also get irritated, especially if you have allergies. It could get quite severe. But usually it's not a problem. Just be aware of it and handle it carefully. And make sure that when you've repotted or done anything, you've pruned it or something, then you wash your hands completely and make sure to throw away so no child or no pet eats from the leaves or any part of the plant. Now, pruning is another thing that we recommend you to do with this plant if you want to keep it a little bit smaller. We prune as soon as we see that the stems, we have large stems on this one here, when they become really, really long and a little bit leggy, you can go in and prune it. Just prune in between two leaves here, in between two nodes. A node is where a leaf is coming out from the stem. Now, on the Aglaonemas, that is really, really close together. So just make sure to try and hit in between with a sharp scissor that is cleaned, so that you're not transferring any bacteria or anything else to the plant. Just make that cut, and what will happen is that you will get new buds forming just below that spot, and hopefully you can get 2, 3, or maybe 4 new stems from that one stem when you've pruned it. This is usually depending on what period of the year you're performing that pruning. If you prune when the plant is active, it's usually active in spring and it's usually active in autumn. It's dormant during winter and the highest temperature of summer. So if you prune in spring or autumn, you have a higher likelihood of getting more buds to form and giving you that really, really full, thick, nice effect. But you can prune all year round, but know that if you prune in wintertime, you will probably only get 1 bud activated and one new stem growing out from that point. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps our channel a lot. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do hit the bell as well so you get a notification every time we put up something new. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram where you can get sneak previews on upcoming videos and sometimes a little bit more. Now until next time, hej då!